After 140 hours of playtime, I have been blown away by the writing in Baldur's Gate 3. Alongside The Last of Us and Disco Elysium, it stands as one of the best written games I have ever played. But you might not realize that there are some fairly sophisticated writing techniques at work in Baldur's Gate 3. And I wanted to break these down so that you know why it's so good, and maybe even you could take these away to your own game writing. Massive spoiler warning: to discuss why the writing is so good, I have to talk about the ending. If you have not played Baldur's Gate 3 yet, do not watch this video, go instead and fire up the game and come back to me when you're ready. Bookmark this video for later. Now we've got rid of all the people who haven't actually played the game, I'm going to start with the big picture stuff and then work down to the writing on a more granular level. In looking at the game as a whole, everything in the narrative serves the moral arc of the story. This is a concept that comes from ancient theatre but has been elaborated on in more recent screenwriting advice, including John Truby's Anatomy of Story. In it, he argues everything should serve the moral argument of the story, and here it does. In Baldur's Gate 3, everything from the most basic NPC dialogue to the major character arcs illustrates the theme of freedom from tyranny. Many of the side quests reflect this, whether it's freedom from an abusive past in the case of Astarion, freedom from religious oppression with Shadowheart and Lae'zel, freedom from captivity when you rescue the gnomes or the tieflings, or freedom from a devil's pact with Will and Raphael, or in the case of Gale, freedom from your ex-girlfriend. Likewise, so-called evil choices would see you oppose this moral arc. Evil choices favor captivity and systems of oppression instead of liberation. The game ends with you either as the liberator of Baldur's Gate or the enforcer of tyranny through the absolute, thus completing the moral arc of the story in a satisfying way. Which leads me to an important point. Baldur's Gate 3 fulfills the contract with the player. Fulfilling the contract with the player is a matter of stating upfront what the story will do and how it will meet the expectations of the genre. Baldur's Gate 3 promises a game where you can be the hero of your own story. And this is stated up front even in things like character creation. We know this too because of the legacy of previous Baldur's Gate games and the heritage of Dungeons and Dragons. The game does exactly what it says on the box and commits wholeheartedly to its roots as a fantasy role-playing game. But the game also fulfills the contract with the player on a character level. The best example of this is in Lae'zel's character arc. About halfway through the game, I texted my friend saying, if this game doesn't end with Lae'zel riding a big red dragon into the sunset, I'm going to be disappointed. Why? Because the game had set this ending up from the start. Lae'zel spends the whole first act declaring, I will ascend. As her journey transforms, she realizes that ascension and her faith in the Light Queen Blackearth is a lie. But even though this low point seemed so far from the ending, I wasn't disappointed. Depending on your choices, Lae'zel ends the game by launching into the air on a big red dragon as the liberator of her people. She does exactly what the game promised at the start. She literally ascends. It's so satisfying because it delivers what was promised in a way that was unexpected. And you know it's an incredible game when even the save screens reinforce this promise. One reason we're so drawn to Baldur's Gate 3 are these complex character arcs. One only needs to deep dive into Reddit to find thousands of posts outlining Astarion's psychology and what the right choices are regarding his story arc. Putting aside this false notion that there are good and bad choices in a video game, both Astarion and Shadowheart's story arcs reflect this complexity, that the thing that they want is not what they need. From a writing perspective, a character needs to verbalize their wants and desires in order to create motivation in the story. As players, we want to know why these characters are the way they are. But combined with the voice acting and dice rolls into perception, detect thoughts, and your tadpole psychic mind powers, there's a level of doubt imbued into these wants that causes the player to reflect on the choices before them. Shadowheart has one of the biggest narrative choices in the game in deciding to fulfill her ambition of becoming a Dark Justiciar by killing the Night Song or turning her back on Shah and saving Dame Aelin. It's a big choice, and not without hours of build-up, learning about Shadowheart's mysterious past in which she verbally expresses a deep desire to become a Dark Justiciar. This is also why I'll remember it as one of the greatest moments in video gaming. I have never encountered a moment where so much rides on a single decision, or what felt like an ever-failing persuasion roll. Inspiration! Inspiration! Drop that spear, Shadowheart! Because the further you dig into her backstory, you realize that Shadowheart doesn't actually want this. She's only been indoctrinated to want this. And this is a great example of subtext in the game, and something that I'll go into a bit later in the video. The same goes for Astarion's choice to replace his former master Cazador and become a vampire ascendant. The cost of this? A mere 7,000 souls of vampire spawn. But digging deeper into his choices, becoming all-powerful is a protection mechanism against the abuse he's suffered. And what's really tragic is that ascending reinforces this cycle of abuse. In fact, persuading him not to ascend is about convincing him about becoming the person he secretly wants to be. Having a character's desires come into conflict with their needs is one of the best ways to create complex characters in a story. It's also made more challenging in writing for games because both choices need to be valid. And that's one of the beautiful things about Baldur's Gate 3. You aren't punished if you decide to roleplay a tragedy or a redemption arc, or simply fail a role. The story is just as rich and deep on the other side of the coin. But why are we so attached to this ragtag group of adventurers? Why, by the end of Baldur's Gate 3, was I sobbing like a baby? There's a few reasons for this. The first is each character has a hook to draw the player into their backstory. It's a question that's posed by their introduction that players have a desire to answer, and the answers to which are uncovered over the entire game. It's really important to note this. I mean, in real life, we don't tell people our whole life story when we first meet them, hopefully not. And it's the same in this game. It's drip-fed over the 3 acts of the story. So some of these hooks include, after rescuing or not rescuing Shadowheart, she's very mysterious and oblique about her past, which immediately means we want to know more. When we first meet Gale, he's trapped in a magic portal, which is a symbol of his larger story. It's not long before we start asking questions about his magic addiction and why he needs all our good items. Will promises that Karlach is a terrifying demon, but we're hooked by the fact that she's the opposite of what was promised. Once the player is hooked, they begin to empathize with these characters through shared universal experiences. Hopefully none of us have sold our souls to the devil, but we can certainly appreciate doing things to appease our parents, which is why Will's story hits a little too close to home. Or having crappy bosses like Karlach's literal boss from hell. It's also important to note that creating empathy for your characters doesn't make them likable or good. One of the best written villains in Baldur's Gate 3 is Ketheric Thorm, who is driven to serve the Absolute through the loss of his family. As players, we understand why he does what he does through empathy, even though we're going to respectfully blast him into brain juice. We're also hardwired as humans to seek approval, so anytime that little Astarion approves beacon flashes up, we're rewarded with a ping of dopamine. And anytime he disapproves, we die a little on the inside. Finally, on a granular level, Baldur's Gate 3's dialogue shows a high level of sophistication and finesse. It's precise in what it needs to communicate, and every line feels like it's weighted with meaning. Each character speaks with their own linguistic patterns, whether it's Gale giving an intellectual treatise on magic or Mintz explaining how space hamsters work. This detail extends to the minor NPCs, and they're utilized to build both the richness of the world and foreshadow what comes next. And these NPCs do a lot of heavy lifting in very short bursts of dialogue. A lot of what we find out about the Absolute is drawn from those conversations, whether people are worshipping it, afraid of it, trying to kill it. And these are done in really short lines, so it's quite an impressive feat. It's also important to know that you don't write like this on a first draft, and you don't write like this without detailed planning, especially around characterization and the overarching narrative. There's clearly been an intense process of refinement over the years of the game's development, with multiple people involved in these revisions. And it's also a reason not to be too intimidated if you're a solo writer. This is a game made by a team, not by an individual. One of the most impressive markers of this sophisticated writing is in conveying subtext. It's hard to do, it requires a lot of skill, and I have never seen it done better in a video game than in Baldur's Gate 3. Subtext occurs when the characters say one thing but do another, creating two layers of meaning. It's when the thing is not about the thing but about a larger thing without being explicitly about the thing. There was a mind-blowing moment for me in Act 3's carnival scene where you're face to face with your love interest and ask questions to see how well you know them. With Astarion, I answered these questions honestly. I'm an honest person. After getting to know him, I knew he valued his freedom, but I got the dreaded Astarion disapproves message. What I hadn't realized is that in being a charlatan with trust issues, the last thing Astarion wants is his past history shared to strangers. Answering these questions correctly to seek his approval is to know him well enough to deflect them. We know Astarion's greatest fear is forever feeling like a slave to someone else. But the answer which continues his protective persona is to break a nail. And that, my friends, is an incredible display of subtext at work, where answering honestly isn't actually the best response. Perhaps what's most impressive about Baldur's Gate 3 is that storytelling here isn't an afterthought. This is a game which has story deeply embedded in its building blocks. It's something that other larger game developers could learn from here. It's not enough to tack a story on a cool mechanic or to demand the narrative designers come up with a justification after the fact. This is a game where everything works in perfect concert, from the visual design to the gameplay itself. You can find story everywhere you look, in the inventory description of the poo scraper, in the soaring notes of Raphael's final act, in picking Nine Fingers' pockets, even in the load screen. I see you there, Baldur, and I know what you're up to. I could go on for hours about why the writing in Baldur's Gate 3 is so good, but I'm gonna leave it there. This game is one of the few that really changed me as a writer. Where I came out shattered from The Last of Us, having learned so much from that game about creating consistent characters in storytelling, I came out at the end of Baldur's Gate 3 having the opposite kind of breakage, that of this bittersweet joy spilling over. It made me want to write something just as beautiful. I hope this breakdown of the game's writing techniques inspires you to write as well. I'm Kat Clay, I'm a game writer and reviewer from Melbourne, Australia. If you like this video, hit that subscribe and like button, and please do talk to me in the comments below. I want to hear what you liked about the writing from Baldur's Gate 3. Thanks so much for watching, guys.